I dream of a future where no one has to wait for an organ transplant like ever again. And that's a big one.
Let's discover what people are building in the greater Cleveland community. We are telling the stories of Northeast Ohio's entrepreneurs, builders, and those supporting them. Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I had the real pleasure of speaking with Franco Kraiselburd, co-founder and CEO of Asclepii, building the next generation of tissue engineering therapeutics for wound healing. I've recently heard a life's work described as a lifelong quest to build something for others that expresses who you are. And in the context of our conversation today, it feels to me that Franco is not just building a company through Asclepii, but has found his life's work and is truly in pursuit of a grand mission. Grounded in an international childhood living across the United States, Spain, Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, Franco began his scientific career at the early age of 12 and has spent the last 9 years dedicating his life to the development of accessible and impactful advanced medical devices, translating the ideas from several different labs within the tissue engineering field into reality and the market. After 5 years working in the University of São Paulo in Brazil, Franco moved to Cleveland, Ohio, to work in the regenerative medicine field as a biomedical engineering student at Case Western Reserve University with Dr. Arnold Caplan, the father of mesenchymal stem cells and the very person whose research had inspired Franco to set off down this path in the first place. A scientist and an entrepreneur, Franco is constantly trying to bridge the world's ideas and reality. His wound care innovations are internationally recognized, being awarded a gold medal at the 2019 Genius Olympiad, nominated for the 2025 Forbes Under 30 and MIT Innovators Under 35, and a finalist in the Rising Tech Star category of Ohio's 2023 Best of Tech Awards. Accolades and recognition aside, I can just express personally, having gotten to know Franco and listened to him tell his story, that his mind is a wonderful thing to behold, and we are lucky to have him as an entrepreneur here in Cleveland. So with that, please enjoy my conversation with Franco after a brief message from our sponsor. Lay of the Land is brought to you by John Carroll University's Boler College of Business, widely recognized as one of the top business schools in the region. As we've heard time and time again from entrepreneurs here on Lay of the Land, many of whom are proud alumni of John Carroll University, success in this ever-changing world of business requires a dynamic and innovative mindset, deep understanding of emerging technologies and systems, strong ethics, leadership prowess, acute business acumen, all qualities nurtured through the Boler College of Business. With 4 different MBA programs of study spanning professional, online, hybrid, and 1-year flexible, the Boler College of Business provides flexible timelines and various class structures for each MBA track, including online, in-person, hybrid, and asynchronous, all to offer the most effective options for you, including the ability to participate in an elective international study tour, providing unparalleled opportunities to expand your global business knowledge by networking with local companies overseas and experiencing a new culture. The career impact of a Boler MBA is formative and will help prepare you for this future of business and get more out of your career. To learn more about John Carroll University's Boler MBA programs, please go to business.jcu.edu. The Boler College of Business is fully accredited by AACSB International, the highest accreditation a college of business can have. All right, so you had just mentioned, you've given a lot of thought here on how to best tell your story and the different chapters of it. So I want to pay deference to that. But everyone who knew that you were to come on this podcast strongly advocated that we set an appropriate context to the work that you're doing by actually delving into your background, your international mindset, your family context, this worldly set of experiences that you've had that have shaped, your interests, how you operate. So I'd love to, open it up for you here to, introduce yourself and take us through your story as you've thought about it.
So my name is Franco, and I turned a $30,000 stem cell therapy into $300. And it all started because I grew up around the world and I got to witness a healthcare disparity firsthand. So growing up, I was born in the US, in Boston, but then I lived in Spain, Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. So a little bit of Europe and the US, but mainly South America. And growing up in South America, I got to witness firsthand what the lack of access to advanced solutions can really cause on a systemic level. And it kind of orchestrated itself in one of the simplest manners ever, which was taking the bus, right? So taking the bus every morning is actually a great way of learning and realizing how the health of a community really is, right? Of a region, because everyone takes the bus, right? Especially back home in Brazil, the public transport systems are very reliable. And so it's a very common thing. So, I used to take the bus with this lady called Maria, right? And, I used to speak to her. I mean, it's like a very typical conversation, like, oh, how you doing? Like, I see you all the time. And she used to work 3 jobs as a maid, right? Like cleaning houses. And I got to see, so she was diabetic, eventually developed an ulcer, and you got to see this progression, right? Like you developed an ulcer on your foot, it started progressing. It started kind of getting worse. She couldn't go to work. She couldn't work as much, so she couldn't earn as much. So, and then every time she had to go to the hospital, she had to skip work, and it just skyrockets. And so I on one hand, I got to see that in an emerging market setting where, solutions aren't as widely available necessarily, although the healthcare systems themselves are very solid. And then at the same time, I actually got to get very early on exposure to an advanced field, the field of regenerative medicine, really of tissue engineering. And that kind of culminated into a journey of discovery for me that very much centered around regenerative medicine, and specifically, mesenchymal stem cells. And it all really boils down to Cleveland. These cells, everything, this whole story, it actually does end up kind of all crossing paths in Cleveland. It weirdly all started in Cleveland, right? And so that my story is a mere example, but also just a great way of showing the power of international collaboration on one hand, right? And the power of really growing up internationally and having an international perspective, and the power of science at the same time is like how much innovation can truly break ground and change people's lives. And we'll talk about, I really want to mention the cell therapy component that my chief scientific officer did in Chile with 200 patients. It was great with the technology. And then the power of Cleveland, like it all, the world's first cellular therapy came out of Arnold Caplan, like Dr. Arnold Caplan here in Cleveland, who created it in Cleveland.
Amazing.
And that changed the world. And so like that was me, like that, my passion for this field and my passion for creating solutions that are advanced and also accessible kind of took us to this point. So then my name's Franco, and that's it. I want to turn a $30,000 cell therapy into $300.
Wow, amazing. So I think you've set an excellent stage for us here and introduced a few threads for us to pull on. And I think we can, ground them and unify it in this all roads converge on Cleveland theme. So with that in mind, as we make our way down one of these roads, I'd love for you to expand upon, for one, your time in Brazil, learning in an environment where I believe you didn't, even speak the language, and how that led you to the discovery, the learning, and ultimately the inspiration that you've received from Dr. Arnold Caplan here in Cleveland.
Yeah. So growing up, obviously, when you go around the world, you're instantly non-traditional, right? Because you're instantly a foreigner in kind of every new environment you're going to, which isn't a bad thing. It's different, right? So when you have a very non-traditional upbringing, you begin to get very non-traditional upsides and value adds, right? So you start exploring just non-traditional paths. So when I moved to Brazil from Spain, and I only spoke English and Spanish, right? As you mentioned, I didn't speak an ounce of Portuguese, and I, we had done some courses. I went to a school that spoke English at first, but then when we really went into the local Brazilian, we had to move into an actual Brazilian high school.
Yeah,
that's where I did my middle school and my high school. I didn't really speak an ounce of Portuguese. You're right. I didn't know anything, and on one hand, that's frightening right? Because, I mean, you don't get to do the things that regular kids get to do at school, right? And you don't get to study for an exam the same way because you don't speak the language, right? But at the same time, it unlocked a area of my life and just an immense amount of value that I would have never been able to open my eyes to. And that was because my teacher went to me and said, Franco, you are not going to be able to succeed in this academic curriculum. You're just not. Like, you don't know what is going on in the exam.
Right.
And I had this little notebook where I would take notes, whatever I could. I would draw. I was very visual. I was a very, very visual learner. So she knew that I was engaged, but I wasn't really like being able to translate that. So she put me on a separate task. She said, beyond everyone else, let's put you on this special program of scientific pre-initiation. So when you go to college, you do scientific initiation, right? It's like your first time in the lab. This is like pre-initiation. So you're getting involved with the scientific method. And she said, if you can do a literature review, even if it's in English, you can do a literature review and start reading papers from the scientific field and really trying to understand it from a different angle. Then we can figure something out. So that was when I realized that the first paper she ever introduced me really was, and one that changed my life was Dr. Arnold Caplan's like 1991, like MSc, like mesenchymal stem cells paper, where he first ever describes this entire new like wildcard cells, as we mentioned, like the UNO, like wildcard cell, which is basically just, it's a cell capable of doing whatever it wants. I mean, with various limitations, but it's like it can turn into skeletal tissue or muscle or skin. And that was very powerful for me. And so, instead of focusing on something like an exam, I would just focus on learning as much as I could from the literature and producing a good report for it.
Yeah.
And that changed my life.
It's amazing to have a teacher like that, first off, who, invests in cultivating your curiosity and academic success in an environment where it may have been prohibitively difficult otherwise. But I love, people always talk about serendipity as, preparation, meeting opportunity, and this paper. So what fire did this light within you? Where does this lead?
So let me explain what the paper was. It's a very simple, very, very technical paper. And at first, the first time you read it, you won't understand anything. I didn't understand anything. Like it's not.
But this paper is in English, not Portuguese, right?
No, it's in English. You don't understand it, not because of language. It's just really technical. So they used to think that prior to 1991 and to this big discovery, the scientific community used to think that cells worked in a different way. So the concept of a stem cell existed, but we weren't really able to find them in a human or like animal body as easily. I mean, it was like we can make them in a lab, but we can't. I mean, we don't understand where they're manifesting, right? Where they're existing in a live setting. And so this limits our capacity to be able to create technologies on top of that, right? Because if we understood where they are in the body, then we could leverage them, we could understand, right? But because we don't, this is an incredibly limiting factor. So Dr. Caplan grabbed like a chick limb, like from a chicken, and understood like the chicken embryo. And in the mesenchyme, like in the middle part of the chicken embryo, started realizing that these cells were behaving in a very wacky way. And he characterized them, meaning he really tried to understand what specific factors made them that way, what factors identified them that way, right? Like why is it capable of turning into muscle or skeleton or this and that? And then realizing that contrary to like popular opinion, when you're looking at an embryo, it's not just all one like type of cell. It's kind of like, there's a lot of things going on there. And so the one that he found specifically that it was a completely different cell than anyone had ever imagined. It was so different that it required to be named differently. And so he named it, right, a mesenchymal stem cell, saying, hey, this is a stem cell that turns into anything that's within your, like the mesenchymal part of your body. So you can think of it as like, instead of your heart, like think of it as like muscle, bone, right, skin, cartilage, right? Like things that are in the middle part of your body, if that makes sense. And I say wrongly because later on, many, many, many years later, he kind of realized that they're not actual stem cells. It's a whole different thing. They're signaling cells, so they tell other cells what to do. But the fact of the matter is that one paper, right, one publication where he named this new type of cell he discovered and realized its potential it's the first cell that we actually realized had a stem potential in the human body. So imagine grabbing that, right, and putting it in a different part of your body. So you have, like, for example, a wound, or you have a heart that's like malfunctioning, or a liver. I mean, and you can start grabbing that and putting it elsewhere. For example, for diabetics, right, who have an insulin deficiency, and you need to kind of start producing more insulin. I mean, they started creating like this eventually resulted in therapies for insulin, like cells that created insulin. But it was all kind of based out of one central paper. So when it was handed to me, it was introduced as, hey, I want you to learn about cells. I want you to learn about the cells that exist in the body. And I want you to learn about what they can become outside if we can, like, influence them in the lab. So we put like proteins and, like, what do they do? So it turns out that if you grab cells from your body, specifically actually your bone marrow, and you put special proteins on them, you can, with many limitations, you can create yourself again. Like, you can, in a way, kind of like duplicate yourself, right? If you really had the right appropriate stuff. I mean, and that was incredibly interesting to me. It's like, imagine.
It is incredibly interesting.
Imagine if you can grab you just make a like a second view, right? And, or maybe you break your leg and you just want to make a new, like, the possibility. I mean, it's the way I saw it. And this was at a very early age. I mean, I read this paper, I must have been 12 years old. It was the future of human health. I mean, these are cells that are capable of completely regenerating an arm, or even manufacturing one from scratch in a like a bioreactor, or it's just a fancy microwave, right? And then putting them back. So I'm trying to be very simplified here, but imagine you handing a 12-year-old kid a paper and telling him, hey, this is your grade. This is what you're going to get your grades out of for school.
Yeah.
And it's not an exam. It's just, I want you to understand how this can change human health and why. And I want you to read about what people have been doing with this, right? Like what has been being done out of this one paper. She said, this is the central piece of the puzzle. Go figure out what MSCs, these mesenchymal stem cells, have become, right? Like, that was my first assignment. She had a master's degree on them, so she obviously knew of them very well. And I ate that up. I loved that. I woke up every morning and went to sleep at night, and I was like, because I just, to this day, I still think of like the duplicating oneself.
Right. No, I mean, it sounds like you still, to this day, are eating it up.
Yeah.
Sufficiently inspired by it.
Yeah.
So what, again, grounding us in this all roads lead to Cleveland, what happens from there?
So, I start reading into it, and it's funny because when you're a scientist, and I was being educated on the scientific method,
yeah,
you're supposed to ask questions, right? You're supposed to ask questions about everything. You question everything is the motto, right? It's what is wrong here? What is right here? I mean, and so I started asking questions. I mean, I started reading into it. I started really understanding what the state of the art was, what scientists today were doing based on a paper from 1991, right? Today, or in this case, it was like 2015, but still, right? Like, I was trying to truly understand, where are the limitations of this field? And in a small way, I was trying to understand where I could fit within this field.
Yeah.
Because magically, from such a young age, having been exposed to this concept of, hey, you can grab cells and you can kind of do whatever you want with them, and you can build yourself a new arm, or you can, kind of improve your liver or your heart and just constantly regenerate yourself, right? Which, by the way, means that we can hopefully eat whatever we want the day of tomorrow and not have to worry about too many Oreos, right? But that was what I was thinking about. I was like, I've always been told about being healthy, and you gotta, and I'm thinking like, well, what if chronic disease could just be completely combated by cells? And so you start asking questions. And my first question was, how can I make this practical? Like, how practical really is this? Like, what is the barrier to this? And it wasn't from don't get me wrong, looking back, it's an excellent question to ask.
It's a phenomenal question. It seems like the right one to have asked. Yeah.
It does. But at the time, it came from a naive place of, hey, I really want to see this. I'm a visual person. I want to really, is this something that only advanced cell scientists and PhDs can access? Or is this something that I could kind of put an ointment or something really, really simple on and like sunscreen and just forget about it and then it's there, right? And that's when, so I've always been a very visual, very practical guy. And that really, going into this Cleveland thing, right? I started trying to understand where the practicality lies in this field, in these cells, in this, and it question after question. So I actually came up with an idea, right? I said, okay, well, what if I started understanding, so these cells, these MSCs, we're going to call them mesenchymal stem cells, are capable of migrating in your body, right? And that was the most practical thing I could find. It's the fact that if they're in point A of your body, they can go to point B. Yeah, quite easily. And all it takes is a protein. You need to have a protein there that kind of stimulates it, that pushes it to do that. So if you have a protein on point B, you can kind of pull, right, these cells towards point B, right? And I thought, okay, so if we can get that protein anywhere, you can revolutionize human health. Like that's as simple as just putting that protein there. And I kept on asking questions and I came up with a prototype idea. But not from the sense of, hey, I want to put this on a patient. It was, I would have loved to, but it was more of the idea of, I want to see this and I want to see if this actually works with these cells. Like if I put the protein, think of it very visually, right? If I put the protein on the left, will the cells migrate towards the left? And so my first question that turned into a prototype kind of got me a job at a local lab that was studying these cells. I was very fortunate to actually have a lab that was working with these cells. I was in a city, so the University of São Paulo is responsible for about 80% of Brazil's research output. I lived in São Paulo, so I had access to a university that was groundbreaking, right, in their research. So I was fortunate enough, but also it's a little bit more than just luck, that there was a lab there doing research. And I kept on asking questions. And so the thing is that those questions led to more complex questions, hypotheses. Well, they led to hypotheses and like theories, right? That I wanted to prove. It's like, okay, well, how much of this protein do I have to put to actually make the cells go that way, right? And okay, what if I want to put this on an animal? What if I want to put this on a human? Like, what are the implications? How long does this protein last? Because that was another thing. If it lasted less than a week. So if I put it there after a week, it wouldn't work, right? And it got more and more and more advanced. So this turned into a full-blown research project. I mean, I had a job, right? It was like I was like 14 years old working on this stuff. Very, very exciting work. And let's just say that eventually this questions got so complicated that they just reached the root. Like I got to a point of knowledge and a point of discovery where I didn't think there was anyone else who could answer the question than this one guy that created them, that discovered them, really. It's like, so
you're on the frontier,
right? There's a certain point. I know, obviously, I don't think you can ever really get to the frontier. I just felt that I was naively mistaken in thinking that, hey, like, I think I've learned a lot about these cells and I want to do something with them.
Sure. But as old as you were, I feel like you pretty comprehensively exhausted the paths at least available to you at the time.
Oh, and it took 3 years. So by the time I actually felt like I had exhausted this, I had already competed in a couple of international science fairs. I had done a lot, and I was about 17. So I was already in the fight for college, right? Like figuring out, okay, if I'm going to go to university, where am I going to go? I mean, and so I figured if I'm going to go to school, I want to go to the school and work under the lab of that guy. Like I want to ask him any question, anytime. So I shoot him an email. I had applied to Case Western Reserve because I Google his name, right? And I find out that he's at Case Western Reserve University, this place in Ohio. I only knew about Ohio because of LeBron James in the 2016 finals, which I watched.
Yeah.
And I applied to Case and I email him. I'm like, it was a long email explaining my life story to him. it was too long for it. Honestly, I don't understand how he responded. It was like, hey, I'm Franco. Honestly, your paper was the first paper I ever read in my life. It led me, at first I didn't understand it, but it led me to ask questions. Those questions led to hypotheses. Those hypotheses led to a prototype. That prototype led to taking me around the world and doing science fairs and doing things that I really enjoyed, and I want to keep doing that. But I feel like I'm at a point where I could only do that working under the person who first ever described them. And I would love to work for you. Like I don't want you to pay me. I just want to go there and learn. And he said, all right, well, let me know if you get into case. And if you do, come visit me. Like, let's do it.
Yeah.
It was COVID. And he hadn't taken in an undergraduate student in 8 years because he had a rule about that he very graciously broke for me. That was, undergrads are hard. I mean, love them to death, but they take a lot of mentorship and just, effort to really teach and to get them there.
Absolutely.
But I had just shown him. So I had a paper, and I didn't really mention this part earlier, but I had written, obviously, as you're a scientist and your questions turn into hypotheses, your hypotheses into prototypes or whatever you're doing really, and to tangible things. And those tangible things turn into results. That's a publication, right? Like that's a paper. So I wrote one. I actually wrote a 40-page paper. 20 pages of introduction explaining like the complex healing process. And by the way, in terms of practicality and considering this Maria lady I met at the bus, I just figured the best way to do it, to find something tangible and to make it practical really, was to find a use case. And that use case felt very natural. I wanted to see if I could heal skin because skin is well within the scope. And I'd seen this lady who had eventually gotten into an amputation because of a foot ulcer that she couldn't treat. And so this kind of you see this all culminating into an ecosystem of innovation where on one hand, I'm seeing the problem firsthand. On the other hand, I'm asking questions and I'm getting there, right? And so at a certain point, my first 20 pages were about, hey, this is what diabetes is, right? This is what wounds are. This is how diabetes affects wounds. And it really, really does. It's awful. So about 500 million people around the world suffer from diabetes. 1 in 4 of these people will develop an ulcer in their lifetime. So diabetes does two things. It's either, and it's usually a combination. It makes your blood flow reduced. Mm-hmm. So I can grab a healthy person versus a diabetic person's, and this is something Kaplan used to say, I can grab a skin sample of a healthy person and a skin sample of a diabetic person, and you'll actually find that the diabetic person is going to have about 50% less vasculature, like blood vessels, really. And the reason for that is because of the glucose. And so on one hand, they have less blood flow, which if you think about it, dries up your skin. It makes it more fragile because it has less literal fluid getting to it. And at the same time, it also affects their ability to feel, their nerves. So you're not feeling it. So your skin's drying up and it's cracking up and it's opening up and you're not feeling this, right? And so that creates a very, very interesting clinical case, right? Because it's a very unique thing. Like it's very, very popular, but 500 million people around the world are suffering from this condition. 1 in 4, all of these people, are going to have, right? Like this fragile skin.
Yeah.
1 in 4 of these are going to open up, like, and cause an actual wound, right? And 1 in 4 of those like wounds that open up result directly in an amputation or death, directly because of that wound. And the reason for that is because they get infected. So you have a wound that's open, the wound gets infected. If it gets infected, you don't want that infection to spread, so you have to amputate if it gets too bad. And so that's awful. But so ultimately, finally, I email this Dr. Kaplan with it, and I tell him, look, this is what I want to do. I want to find a way to put your cells onto the human body with a protein. And that's what I want to study. And he said, great, come to work to me. And the first thing he really, really told me when we met really was that, hey, I don't take undergrads. So I think it's awesome the work you've done. And I'll take you, but you're not going to be doing wound healing work. If you're going to come work for me, I want you to work on what I'm doing. And I'm out here focused on cancer. So if you want to, understand these cells through a different lens, and you really want to get into an entirely different realm of these cells and kind of diverge a little bit from your wound healing work, which I was still very passionate about, I'm willing to take you in. Under my wing, it was a very circumstantial hire. They needed people because of the COVID pandemic. I was the only one who knew how to do this thing called immunohistochemistry, which is just a study of tissue. Basically, I knew how to study tissue because I had done it for my other role in the University of São Paulo. He's like, all right, kid, like let's see what you got. And so I worked there. I worked there every single year of my undergrad at Case until May 2024 when I graduated. And then so I studied them in a different context, right? So it pushed me to understand cells through a different lens, right? Because I was thinking about it from, okay, healthy cells, right, in a human body, let's get them to a wound and let's heal that wound and let's try to prevent that. By the way, it turns out that already existed. It didn't work, that solution. So my first prototype would have not worked. And he's like, study it in a cancer setting. Yeah. I want you to understand how they, So that's how it all started circling slowly into Cleveland, and it changed my life.
Yeah, evidently. So let's layer on Asclepii to this conversation, right? So you're tackling the chronic wound crisis by building the next generation of tissue engineering therapeutics for wound healing. What does that mean? And where does that come from?
Yeah, it sounds very nebulous when you put it that way. Wait, I think I put it that way.
But let's unpack that, what is this business? And how does a business even come into play with, really what seems like a scientific, research path?
Yeah, so very, very great segue. Working at the Kaplan lab, it's an ecosystem, all right? It is an ecosystem of people, of capital, of institutions and partners and of just knowledge and technology all into one small, the density of intellectual capital in a small hallway in like a biology department of Case Western Reserve was incredibly abundant, and I had never seen something like that before. So it was to the point where, I was working together with researchers who had done just about anything you can imagine with these cells in the past, and they all culminate into this one place. Like I said, all roads lead to Cleveland, and it's because this Dr. Kaplan, right, Arnold, had culminated this ecosystem of people, extremely smart people, extremely well motivated and driven and really well focused because they knew exactly what they wanted to do and how to get there. And so I'm here, and sure, I'm studying them in a cancer context. And that was the project I had there, but you still have that passion, you have that itch in your head, and you have that feel, and you go to lunch. It all started going to lunch. This new guy comes into the lab. He's from Chile. His name's Miguel. And he's a brilliant researcher, brilliant guy.
Yeah.
And also very funny guy he would put like music and just dance. And it was like, I thought you were like really smart. Like, what is this? And he's like, yeah, whatever. So it starts shattering what like your image of like a mad scientist really is, because you start realizing that a mad scientist is just a guy who loves science and loves to have fun, and that was Kaplan too. He was very fun. And so anyway, I'm in this ecosystem, and remember, I had a passion, I had a mission, I had a problem that I still wanted to solve. There's still 500 million people in the world that are constantly at risk of getting an amputation from this chronic wound, and I felt that technology could be the answer, right? Like I knew these cells could be the answer in a way.
Yeah.
And let me tell you that the biggest issue with these cells is not the cell itself. It's actually getting it to where it needs to go, right? It's the fact that getting a cell from like point A to point B requires either a really complex protein similar to a vaccine that will degrade after a week if you don't keep it at frozen conditions, which is impossible. On vaccines, in the context of like a global emergency for COVID, that made sense, but you can't do that for diabetes and like chronic diseases as easily. Or it requires you grabbing cells from one part of your body and putting them in another. But then that means that you have to go to a hospital and spend hours in an operating room setting to do that, right? Or you kind of got to pray and hope for the best, right? And so most people, especially in emerging settings, but even here in the US, don't get to the part where they can actually get that cell there. They don't get to go to the hospital and apply a therapy. It's not very common. And the unfortunate truth to that is because the infrastructure is just so complicated to do so. And that's why the $30,000 figure really is because of the sheer amount of time that it takes and the sheer amount of visits that you have to make for a patient to get a treatment, right? So it's not necessarily just that the sticker price is 30 grand. It's really that everything around it it really culminates to that figure. So when I was in that ecosystem and I wanted to solve this problem, I did the National Science Foundation's iCore Accelerator, right? So through the University of Akron Research Foundation. I teamed up with Miguel. Miguel had done work like this in the past, so he knew a lot, right, about the clinician perspective. And eventually Miguel, we had an aha moment. It was a really crazy thing where in one of my iCore calls, I did a customer interview to Dr. Jim McGuire out in Temple University. He's the founder of the Academy of Physicians in Wound Healing. He is a very well-recognized figure. I just called him and he picked up the phone. I couldn't believe it. And I just started talking. We had like an hour and a half long conversation about where the needs are in these patients and where like different solutions can come in and where he saw cells and scaffolds coming into the picture, because that's what I wanted to do as well. And eventually Miguel had worked on a technology. So Miguel developed a cell therapy in Chile in his past life, which saved 200 patients. My coworker at the Kaplan lab figures out that it's about hours and it's about visits. So if you can reduce the amount of hours and visits, you can reduce the $30,000 figure to way less. And at some point I called Jim McGuire and I explained this concept to him. In doing so, we created a platform. We created something that is able to incorporate compounds very, very easily, with very versatile capabilities. And so all of a sudden, that's tissue engineering, that's regenerative medicine platform, right? Like that is what we do. Does that make sense a little bit? I actually am very curious as to, you might have some question about, I probably didn't do a great job of explaining it.
No, I mean, to the best of my abilities, I'm following along. Like in any workflow, my brain works more in a software, kind of orientation. But if there are steps and you can remove those steps but achieve the same outcome, then you can pursue those and unlock a lot of value in the process of doing it. And if what you've created that allows you to remove those intermediary steps, other people can use for other purposes, you've unlocked even more value.
Okay,
that's the platform
exactly.
idea.
You got it exactly. That is exactly it.
Amazing. Lay of the Land is brought to you by Impact Architects and by 90. As we share the stories of entrepreneurs building incredible organizations in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio, Impact Architects has helped hundreds of those leaders, many of whom we have heard from as guests on this very podcast, realize their own visions and build these great organizations. I believe in Impact Architects and the people behind it so much that I have actually joined them personally in their mission to help leaders gain focus, align together, and thrive by doing what they love. If you too are trying to build great, Impact Architects is offering to sit down with you for a free consultation or provide a free trial through 90, the software platform that helps teams build great companies. If you are interested in learning more about partnering with Impact Architects or by leveraging 90 to power your own business, please go to ia.layoftheland.fm. The link will also be in our show notes. So this concept is the foundation for Asclepii.
Yeah.
And
what is so novel.
What does Asclepii mean, by the way?
Oh yeah, and I'll tell you in this. Yeah, so Asclepii is a wordplay, right? So it's the plural. So Asclepius is the Greek god of medicine, right? It's known as the healer of all wounds. Very much something that just was very inspiring to me. It was a Greek tale that I thought it was the only. So he was a doctor, a very, 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 very good doctor that was so good that he could cure death. And so he was a demigod, and so he got turned into a star. He's the only mortal who actually got turned into a god because of his incredible medical abilities. And so Asclepii is a plural of that. It's like we're making a bunch of little Asclepiuses, and we're making a bunch of little healers of all wounds.
Amazing.
And by the way, I love that you bring this software perspective. You're so right. Most people think about it from a software perspective. So, but imagine bringing that into cell therapy. Like imagine bringing concepts of like platforms, right, that are often nebulous and really not simple into something that is scalable, simplified, and just doable for a cellular therapy as complicated as $30,000 per wound, right? And it's like, that's why what we're doing is just, I'm so passionate about what we're doing. It feels incredibly powerful, and going to the lab every day is a pleasure for us.
Right. No, I mean, it reminds, there are a lot of parallels to draw here, and also a million, threads introduced that we won't have time to pull on all of them. But, when I think about the Human Genome Project, for example, which was in the early 2000s, took about 13 years, $3 billion of computing power and resources to complete just one. I mean, we're at a point today writing down, Wright's law, basically, of innovation, where you can do the sequencing of a genome for a few $100s in a few hours. And so we're at a point where I think through kind of, what are the limiting reagents of what allowed us to do this in the first place, and how can we remove those so that we can do it at a much greater scale. And then the platform idea as well, right? Like when you can sequence many millions of human genomes, you can ask a lot more interesting questions and do a lot more interesting things than when we only had one.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a great parallel to draw.
So I have to ask one detour question, and we'll constantly ground it back in this all roads lead to Cleveland as we kind of catch ourselves up to the present and look towards the future. But there's this archetype of founder, I think in society we hear a lot about, the Harvard dropout, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Bill Gates of the world, who turned down, for the sake of this conversation, I'll call it a highly prestigious credential in the pursuit of something entrepreneurial. So I don't mean to suggest anything, predictive with this analogy, but I do need to ask what your thinking was and motivation to turn down a Thiel Fellowship, which in, other pockets of society may be considered, of the highest signal and most competitive credentials that you can have. So, I have a feeling, just based on, the passion you've exuded for what you're building, but just take us through that and how you think about, over the course of all of this, what motivates you and keeps you focused on this vision that you have.
That's an excellent question. That name, so it was a lot of conversations that I had. And the real answer, I'll tell you right now, is there is no right answer.
Yeah.
Founders build out of their hunch and their passion and their drive. But for me, there was. And the reason for that is because it just boils down to people and team and trust. At the point that fellowship came into question in my life, I was a junior in college, and I had built a network and an ecosystem of people who not only believed in what we were doing and in the potential that we had to save people's lives, but believed in me and my ability to lead it, and more so also wanted to see me thrive. And so in deep tech, one relies very heavily on university affiliations, PhDs, medical doctors. I mean, you name it. I mean, very just high knowledge individuals.
Yeah.
And my immediate wish was to take it. I wanted to stand by the side of giants before me who took it, right, and who did amazing things with it. Notably, for example, Mark Zuckerberg, who became all of that, right? Like Meta. And I mean, on one hand, it was an honor to be able to be there. But at the same time, the people that around me didn't see it the same way that I did, or that you would see it, right? I mean, if you telling a PhD, someone who values academia very deeply, hey, I want to drop out of college to do this, that doesn't really instill trust or stability in their head. As a leader of what was becoming and it is now an international consortium for medical innovation based around medical and very highly advanced stuff, they don't see this as stability. I mean, they don't want to build an Airbnb or a Facebook or a DoorDash. I mean, we want to build something that is built upon a foundation of knowledge that is so solid and so carefully crafted that you can't just drop out of college and kind of figure it out type of deal. And I'm telling you, I wanted to do it so bad. It was a very tough conversation with my loved ones, with my mother, or my father, with my company. But to a point, it just felt, and we had spoken about it, and it just felt like half of my team would have lost their trust for me if they did it. And honestly, Jeff, one of the most valuable things, and honestly, the most valuable thing I have is the relationships I've built with the people around me and is my team. I mean, Asclepii is Asclepii because of the team that we have. It would never, ever be the same if I just dropped out and figured it out kind of, and kind of forgot, or let's just say like betrayed the trust, right, of all the people that have helped me build this. Excellent question. I mean, it's people ask me this all of the time, but I didn't want to go that route. I like Cleveland. I don't want to go to San Francisco right now. I've been there. It's awesome. I mean, it's great, but there's so much value in building here,
Well, you're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
That certainly resonates, and there's a lot of wisdom in that. But certainly appreciate that the gravity and convergence here in Cleveland is strong. So where is Asclepii today?
Yeah. So we've built our MVP. We've gathered some very important and great data on it so far. And we're entering what we call preclinical trials. So that is in animals. So we've gotten the platform. We've partnered with different universities and partners, and we've built a very great traction and momentum. We've raised about $1 million, just non-dilutive grants and funding to test. So we're testing the platform alone, but we're testing the platform also with different variants, right? So for example, I mentioned infections are a very big driver of amputations. So we created a version of Artemis with special silver nanoparticles so that we can combat infections with.
And Artemis is a terminology we've not introduced yet. So
you're right. So Artemis is the name of our scaffold, of our platform, of our product. So Artemis is our flagship product.
Amazing.
Yeah. So Artemis is really kind of what Asclepii really culminates into. It's the name of this platform, right? It's the name of this vision, right? And so Artemis itself, I actually have it, but obviously I'll show it to you in person. And I know there's no visual component to this, but it's a blank canvas. Think about it as it's like the stem cell of it's like you can create
tabula rasa,
right? And so we're testing it. It's very important to see how it performs on itself, to see the baseline and to see kind of, but we're also collaborating. So we have a very strong collaboration we're so excited about with Case Western Reserve's like Center for Modular Manufacturing of Structural Tissue, which at the forefront of tissue engineering innovation. It is housed at Kaplan's lab. May he rest in peace. He passed away in January. But so we're testing the product now so that it'll be available within a year. So 1 year from now, you'll be seeing initial sales and units of the first versions of Artemis that we're pushing out. So the really the first one. So what we're trying to do is, right, we're introducing a pipeline very slowly but very surely. The first product that's very important is what's called a wound bed prep technology. So it's like you're not healing, you're just preparing the wound so that it's ready and ripe for healing, and that is a third of the way. It's a very, very important portion of of healing. And funnily enough, a wound bed prep technology can be in any wound. It doesn't really need to be a diabetic wound. You can put that anywhere, which is great. And so that's our first one. And then we're introducing our cellular therapy. So we're taking it up a notch, or like 2.0 with like more advanced stuff. But the 1.0 will be available just to everyone. It's kind of like, we're starting with small clinics, eventually going to hospitals. We dream of a future that this can be available over the counter just easily for like in Walmart or something. And we're slowly building out, but we're not in market yet. We're just building out the validation. We're building out the traction, the partnerships, and the capital to build data and necessary physician relationships and interactions with the product. And we're building the product so that really, it's iterated constantly with input from the users themselves, from the patients and from the physicians alike, and from the system more broadly. But so right now we're in the data collection phase, preclinical trials. We're going into kind of more advanced things later next year. But for now, right now, that's what we're looking for. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So with that, if that's level 1, level 2, if you were to, skip ahead to the end of the book and then, or rather look at the table of contents, what are levels? What's the end level? Like, what is your ultimate vision? What does success mean? And then what are the levels preceding that?
Oh, Jeff, you're going to like to hear this. It's cool. Oh, it's really, really, really
take
cool.
Take us through it.
Organ manufacturing from scratch. Like, I dream of a future where, maybe not in your house, but like you go to a little microwave and you press a button and you say, I want a liver. And you put a little bit of your DNA or something, you show that, or you even put like a biopsy of your own cells. And in a matter of maybe a week, you have a full organ reconstructed built for your own specific genetic code. Need a new heart? I dream of a future where no one has to wait for an organ transplant like ever again. That's a big one. And it's more so because if you can do organ manufacturing, you can get into eventually, a plethora of potentials, applications. We've talked to the military, we've talked to, but for me, let's just say if you can build an organ, you can build anything, right? You can eventually, this whole duplicating yourself thing seems like increasingly more possible. I don't want to clone a human being. I don't think but I definitely want humans to be able to have replaceable organs. Just like, hey, I need a new liver. Let's do that. Let's make that happen. It's a therapy that it's realistically accessible and doable. Can you imagine yourself one day being told, hey, honestly, your liver is failing. You're at risk. Go to the hospital and get exchanged for a new liver. And you go to the and in 2 weeks between you being told that you don't have a liver that is healthy, and you go into the hospital in 2 weeks, you have a new liver completely done, and it's your genetic material, your own cells. That's what I'm talking about.
It is one of the most ambitious ideas I have ever heard. Just simple as that. On this spectrum, so if that's the of the potential end states and the goal and the vision, on the spectrum of science fiction to science reality, how achievable is this?
Completely.
And then, to kind of reiterate, like, what are the antecedents to that, the other levels along that path?
Yeah, and let me tell you, it's very, very doable. The problem with it is. It's from a scientific perspective, this isn't delusional.
Yeah.
I'll be very honest in saying that the biggest challenge is actually scaling it. It's making it scalable and accessible. And that's what Asclepii is at the forefront of. We're not in the business of pushing. So we like to say that we're pushing tissue engineering, right, and regenerative medicine to new horizons. We're not just pushing the science part, which is great, but we're in the business of making it accessible and available and scalable, really. Obviously, I don't want to be too blunt and say, obviously we're creating very cool med innovation, but like the fact is we're from the cradle of this technology is we're making it so that it's easy. So let me tell you where we're at right now in terms of society. In fact, our partners at Case Western at the Center for Modular Manufacturing are partnered with like Mayo Clinic, Regenerative Medicine, biomanufacturing labs. They're partnered with the Advanced Regenerative Manufacturing Institute. They're partnered with, they're doing, so right now, what have I told you that right now Case Western is looking to build a limb, a joint from scratch in the next 5 years. That's what's happening now. That is what our partners are doing, right? We're inserted in that ecosystem because we're trying to solve their headaches, and we're really looking to help push their innovations forward. But that's what's happening now, right? So the first, let's just say the first examples of completely artificial joints or organs are going to happen within the next 5 years. I will barely be 30, honestly.
Yeah.
And from there, the question becomes, how do you make it scalable? And that very simply, I'm a tissue engineer, that I see myself as that. And it boils down to three main components. It's very, very, very simple. It is cells. It is the cells are the building block of life. It's stimuli, which is the language that your body speaks. It's like electricity or proteins or whatever you want to, temperature. All these are different stimuli for your cells. And then the last part is the central piece of the puzzle, which is what Asclepii does, is the scaffolding, right? Portion is the mesh that holds it all together into one. That's really what tissue is. It's super simple. It's called the tissue engineering triad. And so the real secret lies in a really good scaffold that can maximize the interactions between the cells in order to achieve. Think about a scaffold. I like to think about a scaffold as an orchestra, like a symphony, right? Because if a scaffold has all of the right notes and they're all of the right intensity and length, your cells, it's almost as if they're perfectly orchestrated to know exactly what they're going to turn into. It's like, think about it as an embryo. An embryo is a weird scaffold. This is weirdly very well done, but it's a scaffold. That's how we build humans. Humans build humans all of the time. It's just a matter of time until we do that as well.
I love that you think of yourself as a tissue engineer. And, correct me if I'm wrong in this framing, but it's almost like entrepreneurship is really just a tool for you to accomplish your goal as a tissue engineer. But I would love to understand what you've learned about company building and that side of it, outside of the scientific and academic, tracks that you've been trotting through over the last, many years.
Yeah, let's get into the business. I do see myself as a tissue engineer. I'm a biomedical engineer, from Case Western. So obviously I have a very technical background, but I took on the business role of this company. And so I've learned a lot about business, about entrepreneurship. And I'll tell you, while for me personally in my journey, especially within this company, I see entrepreneurship as a means to an end. And that is true. I've come to learn that entrepreneurship is far beyond just a means to an end, though. I think it's a very, very necessary and useful tool. It's a way of looking at the world in a way that is different, let's just say, from what exists. It's literally, it's the act of entrepreneurship is challenging the status quo, whatever that may be, right?
Yeah.
I think, and by the way, obviously I'll tell you 10 years down the line if this worked out or not, but we had to, I'm a 22-year-old. I love to say this. I'm 22 years old. Leading a healthcare company.
Yeah.
Not just am I I'm a first-time founder.
Yeah.
I'm a first-time founder, and you look at my youthful face, and that doesn't really instill knowledge or confidence it does. Don't get me wrong. I think very, very, very people way smarter than me have believed in me a lot more than I have. I don't know why. I love them. No, but seriously, when I first went out to seek help and capital to do this, it wasn't an easy conversation because, at first, when you don't know who I am, you're like, all right, well, why are you the best person in the world to lead this? Because that's often a question that is, in entrepreneurship, you have to be the best person in the world to make this happen. And now it's very, very clear. But when it started, it wasn't as clear, I think. And so we walked into rooms. And this is actually my biggest piece of advice to any entrepreneur is if you are walking into a room where you don't feel appreciated, you're in the wrong room. Like objectively, I walked into a room in Ohio, let's just say generically at first, I walked into a room in Ohio and I asked for money to do an MVP for Artemis. Hey, we're Asclepii. We want to really tackle like the diabetic foot ulcer problem. We work with these scientists and these entrepreneurs, and we want to do it. And for many reasons, capital was risk averse for us at first. It was tough to get. I mean, it's because just the amount, the sheer, and rightfully so, the sheer amount of risk that someone would have to intake. I was 20 years old at the time, promising them that I would be able to make an MVP in 3 months if they gave me 3 months and 20 grand. That's what I was saying. And it was just, you know how many other Cleveland Clinic awesome physicians there are here for them to also could realistically also do that in 3 months and 20 grand. I mean, and they already have their own lab. So that was the thing, is like in Ohio at first, I had a hard time. I had a lot of no's, and that really, really brought me, like, it empowered me to keep going. And so I went to Mexico. So funny, really crazy story. I mean, Case Western paid for me to go to a conference in Puerto Rico. The Puerto Rican conference had some people from MIT. I connected with the MIT people. I pitched to them. They were like, hey, listen, I can't do this in my lab, but this is something that my really good friend out in Mexico at the Tec de Monterrey Institute, it's like the MIT of Mexico, can do. And so I pitched to their tech transfer director.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, this is what I want to do. And Mexico is like one of the global capitals of diabetes. It is a terrible incident. It has a terrible incidence of diabetes. And so they didn't just see the potential of what I was doing from a scientific perspective. They said they saw a kid in the US with US connections that could all of a sudden also just introduce a strong partnership for them. So I walked into a room where I wasn't just a kid in Ohio competing with Cleveland Clinic physicians. I was someone with a US connection that could potentially really solve many of their own headaches on top of creating disruptive innovation, right? I hate that. I love the word, but it's like, it's just so overused. So I'll just say innovation or technology.
Sure.
They were like, I love this. And they gave me the 20 grand in the 3 months. And they were like, well, but if you don't do it, the stakes were very high because obviously there were, but I did. I went there. I won a pitch competition here in Cleveland, the Morgan Thaler Pavey startup competition, 2023. We got second place in the venture track out of like 40 something companies. Got $5,000. That $5,000 paid for me to go to Mexico, spend 3 months there. And we did our MVP. We got some initial data on it. We were able to prove that we were not completely incompetent. And that's how it all started. From that transformed into a $500,000 grant, another $300,000 investment. And we just actually got into Capital Factory's All Access Fund from Texas. So like we were getting connected to many investors, and it just all because of one MVP that we were able to prove to them that we were able to build. And now next thing you know, I become somewhat of an advocate for young entrepreneurs in deep tech in the world, but in Latin America and in Northeast Ohio and the US specifically. It's been awesome.
Yeah, amazing. I love all of this. It's hard to even figure out how to, put a bow on this conversation. I really genuinely feel like we could talk for many hours about this, but I'll ask you. It's not really even a fair question, but as you reflect on this journey you've been on, the path still in front of you, what are the most important things we haven't talked about?
Well, I think, I'm not going to hammer down on the Cleveland's awesome part. I think you do a great job of that. Actually, I'll tell you something I learned from you that I loved to learn recently when I went to your event. It was the power of connection is so huge. I think in my journey as an entrepreneur, the only reason I've been able to achieve, and I would say, I'm super proud of what we've done so far, but the only reason we've been able to achieve what we've got, we've raised $1 million before I graduated college. It was a lot, but it's just because of genuine, like authentic connection with people. I was very candid, and I think honesty is a huge deal. I think like that was something that I don't think I make clear enough is like, I genuinely believe anyone can do it, but they just have to be passionate and they have to be genuinely honest about where they're at and like how to keep going. And but I think also there's a portion of, there's so much iteration in this process. I mean, my mind was very open, but I don't think that's something that's super common in entrepreneurship, is like having an open mind has to be very deliberate. I learned that a lot through like the I-Core methodology. I very much respect the National Science Foundation's program for that. That was great.
Yeah.
But I don't know what I guess like for me that just as other entrepreneurs listen to this, that's kind of, I'm actually curious in learning more about what you think of that, like specifically, right?
Well, for one, I greatly appreciate that sentiment and that it's been meaningful for you, because that was the goal. You know, when I was trying to build my own company here, I was kind of surprised by how few of the folks who have opted to do this very difficult thing of trying to build a company, you know, regardless of what the problem is. It could be, you know, organ manufacturing and tissue regeneration, or it could be, you know, cabinet manufacturing. It doesn't matter actually, but it's a very difficult thing to build something from scratch and to solve a real problem for people. And the only folks who can truly empathize are the other people who are going through that. And to the degree that you have a community of those people around you, wherever it is, it's incredibly important as part of the journey, especially from a leadership perspective within the company, because you kind of have to always put on this, you know, outward facing facade of confidence, you know, grounded in the humility of whatever it is you're solving. But, you know, you can't run through all the challenges of your organization within. You know, you often need folks outside of it to bounce ideas and to get like true, unfettered, honest takes about the realities of what are happening. And so that community part to me is very important. And it's not only important, I think to your point, it is requisite. Like you need, it takes a village. I truly believe that. And so to the degree that we can build this village, you know, that is a very motivating thing for me personally, outside of any of the individual work that I get to do. And what you also mentioned there that I think deeply resonates is the passion for whatever it is that you're solving. Because, I mean, I could tell you, I could work my entire life on what it is you're trying to do, and I wouldn't even get to where you were from the time that you became 14 to 16. You know, like that level of passion, I would just bang my head against a wall for 40 years before I made the kind of progress that you did on this specific problem. And so that ingredient really does matter as well.
No, I guarantee you, if you actually put your head to it, I'm sure you could do great things with it. But I definitely agree with passion. Yeah, I definitely. And connection. I mean, it's funny because you say this, and like I've had so many conversations, both here in the US and abroad, with great founders, just candid conversations about, hey, this is where I'm at. Like, I don't know. And in fact, mentorship, like I always like to say that I stand on the shoulders of giants, like with everything I do. And they always, those giants are, some of them are the same, like Dr. Caplan and Arnold is always going to be a giant for me. But then there's new people that come along the way, like entrepreneurs that I meet along the way that just truly just change the way I see things. And I think another part is just believing in what you do. You're right. The facade is like, funnily enough, I actually don't think that I do much of a facade in terms of like, you know, I mean, I like and I genuinely believe what I said, but I definitely think that that's actually a blessing and a curse, because the fact that there's not a facade means that when I'm not feeling confident about it, it's apparent. And sometimes it's scary, you know. I mean, one is young. I don't know, like, if I'm doing the right thing, or sometimes I wonder if, like, hey, is the fact that I have to travel to all these different partners and countries now because we've leveraged international partnerships good or bad? I see it as a great thing, but I can also understand how it could be stressful and diverge attention. So it's a constant conversation of trying to like understand and believe what we're doing, you know, and I think it's huge.
Yeah. Well, and I think there are benefits to the naivety of doing this, you know, when you're young, you know. So almost every of the biographies, less from the podcast, but of founders I've read, you know, there's a perennial reflection that is, had they known what they know now when they were starting it, they wouldn't have done it because it's so hard and it required so much persistence. And it takes that true, genuine curiosity about whatever it is you're trying to solve and the passion to try and solve it to force your way through,
I would say that.
The whole journey.
I would not do it. It's funny because my parents want me to be a serial entrepreneur, serial founder. I'm like, girl, I am not going back to this again. This is a lot.
Yeah.
You want to ask me what my favorite hidden gem in Cleveland is?
Yeah. Well, I would love to bookend it there as our traditional closing question. But I do feel compelled to ask, this standing on the shoulders of giants. You mentioned Dr. Kaplan passed away this year, and I'm my condolences because he's evidently meant so much to you. It's more than clear from this conversation. What are your biggest learnings and takeaways from him as a mentor and person in your life?
Oh, that is a great question. He had his rules. He had like a set of rules. But rule number one, you're not going to believe this. Rule number one is scientists cannot be CEOs. That is his rule number one. It's true. The great Arnold Caplan, the first thing he told me when I told him I was going to start a company is like, you're delusional, dude. Go get a PhD or something. I mean, he loved me to death. And I love the guy. But someone who I deeply admired and respected. And mind you, he started a company called Osiris Therapeutics that sold in 2019 for $660 million. I mean, he knows a thing or two about creating real value. And his first piece of advice to me was scientists cannot be CEOs. And I think my biggest lesson of them all, the mother of all lessons I have ever learned from Arnold, and I say this so lovingly, and he knows, he knows this, but it's to be stubborn as hell. It's, in fact, I gave him, one of the last conversations I had with him was, I gave it a twist. I thought about what he was saying and I said, you're right. Scientists can't be CEOs, but CEOs can be scientists. And from that moment, it's true. Right? And I thought about that one for a long time. And so one of the last things he said to me was, I see what you're doing now, kid. Like, I get it. And I mean, if it was up to what he wanted me to be, he had so much love and admiration and respect for me, but he would have wanted me to take a different path in life. I mean, if it were up to him, I would have been a biology major or something. And I think to a certain degree, the biggest lesson I learned from Arnold Caplan was probably that you make your own path, and that is beautiful, and that is okay. And you don't have to listen to what everyone says, no matter how much you respect them and love them. And honestly, like, I mean, don't be too stubborn. I mean, it's obviously like, don't be ignorant. But if you don't feel compelled enough to drop what you're doing, then don't. I have zero regrets in this immense journey, all the effort we've done. And I mean, I thought of giving up so many times. Like, the first no I got when I was looking for that 3-month, like 20 grand MVP money, I almost gave up. And I'm so glad that I did it because I was stubborn. So I think that was the biggest lesson for sure.
Well, I love your gumption and your humility. And I think you've got wisdom beyond your years. There's no doubt about it to me. Well, the traditional closing question, so I'll throw it your way.
I was waiting for it, and I thought about it a lot because I kind of want to give two answers.
Sure.
One is for entrepreneurs, and one is for the personal side, which is a very big deal. I think having a personal life is very important as an entrepreneur. My first answer is Sears ThinkBox. I do not think that place is nearly as appreciated or known as it should be. It is a force of nature. ThinkBox is amazing and it is open to the community.
Yeah.
Any day anyone wants to just work out of their 6th floor entrepreneurship, you can. It's open there like 9 to 7 or something. It's great. And the people there are just spectacular. Major shout out to Michael Goldberg and Tiffany McNamara, who've been my mentors for a very long time, and I really appreciate it. So that was the I have to give this answer because I love this place. But then my second answer is I'm a very big coffee guy.
Yeah.
And Algebra Tea House out in Little Italy has been, I mean, they serve great coffee and great food. And I've very much enjoyed just thinking of like just going there and just enjoying. It's a very like award-winning place, you know, they're very well decorated. And I've enjoyed just thinking about it, like thinking in there, having conversations. So that's my second one.
Two excellent ones. Full cosign on both of those places. Well, wow. I'm inspired. I really appreciate you taking the time, Franco. This is awesome. I love your ambition. I love that you love Cleveland. I love that you're doing it here. And so thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all you do for the city. I also spend a lot of time in New York, so I understand the dichotomy. My mom lives there. And hey, no, I'm very glad to be part of this ecosystem. And I'll say I was very nervous at first, getting into this. I get blanked many times, just because this is like something that for me is like a way of immortalizing, like, you know, this conversation will be immortal in some way. So I think I very much appreciate the ability to be here. And I really, really, I hope this was valuable for anyone out there listening that might just be interested, and feel free to reach out. Yeah.
Well, it was certainly valuable to me as a listener to you. So I can give you that right off the bat.
Thank you. Yeah. CEOs can be scientists.
Well, if folks had anything they wanted to follow up with you about, Franco, where would be the best place for them to do so?
Yeah. LinkedIn is a big one for me. Yeah.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that's a wrap. That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. So if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm or find us on Twitter @podlayoftheland or @sternhefe, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with the Up Company, LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.